I'm Glenn. Welcome to The Way Back. This is mine and Steph's YouTube channel that offers insight and inspiration to help you reclaim your life back from addiction and, all being well, find your way back. This is Steph.
Hi friends, I'm Steph. Along with the YouTube channel, Glenn and I also share a sobriety date. It is the 17th of October 2016. We support each other and we keep each other accountable, and our hope is that with these interviews and video blogs we can help you along your sobriety journey as well. So thank you for joining us. Today we have with us Clive. Clive is, well, we're going to learn more about Clive. He's new to our online recovery support group, so we actually don't know a lot about Clive. I do know that he is a smart recovery facilitator, so we're going to learn a lot more about that today. But to start with, we'd really like to just hear your journey. So if Clive, if you wouldn't mind taking us back to where it all started for you, when you started drinking, and how that progressed for you.
Yeah, sure, and hello everybody. Yes, it's a very long story. Long in terms of, if you like, when the actual addiction or the triggers to that addiction actually started. I was brought up in a very liberal family, and I suppose alcohol was sort of introduced to myself at a reasonably early age, and well, actually a very early age, probably pre-16. It made it, I think, not unusual for alcohol to be around, although alcohol was never an excessive thing in the family, certainly not. And it still isn't really on, my parents who were both alive and are not heavy drinkers, etc., never have been. But I think the problem arose when I moved into more stressful situations from a work position, really coming up through the criminal justice community in very strict formal sort of environments, and then moving into those where I became, the top man, the big man that was flying around the world, sharing conferences, etc. Being put very much into an environment where, free from the usual inhibitions of home and the office, alcohol and generally enjoying the experience became quite something. I mean, that probably would have been okay. It was handleable. I wouldn't have at that time considered myself to even be a heavy drinker. In the cycle of change of those that know about that, I would probably have been remaining in this pre-contemplation stage. Possibly occasionally think, I wish I didn't do that so much. However, back end then of 2006, the very back end, I had a breakup with my wife of 25 years marriage and a relationship of nearly 28 years. And the mother of my two children. Although the breakup was effectively, not acrimonious as such, I moved reasonably quickly, or very quickly, within months, down to the Brighton area where I am now. And really, my lifestyle changed. I describe myself as turning up as a reasonably sober professional person and turning very quickly into the child in the sweet shop. It really was a case of wine, women and song. Living alone in a flat in Kemp Town, and anybody who knows Brighton would instantly go, oh really? The liveliest probably part of the Brighton world, which is a very liberal, open environment. We probably have more licensed premises in Brighton than any other place in Britain. In fact, I'm pretty sure that statistic is true. So I basically, yes, went a little bit mad. In fact, probably far too mad. It was too easy. I had money in my pocket. I was a professional man, etc. And it ended up with lots of very bad relationships, etc. But one that was actually amazing. I met a woman who became my second wife. And although the drink and the general freedom held me back somewhat from doing the decent thing, I finally decided to do so and made the big decision and asked her to marry me, which was wonderful, and she thankfully accepted. And very shortly afterwards, within months of that, really, we were married back in November of 2009. And if you ask the big question then, as you did, getting to the point, what is it that then threw you totally over the edge? It was 7 days later she died. In very tragic circumstances, in a basement flat with me trying to perform CPR on her and failing miserably. This is a woman who was also 3,500 miles from her home. She was actually born in Canada, but she was from the southern states of America. Over here doing her PhD, and that episode left me with obviously tremendous scars and whatever. And if I have to point the finger of what finally tipped me over the edge into hardcore alcoholism, stroke, which is a terrible word, and one maybe we'll mention later as to why that's avoided, but into a very strong addictive behaviour and not being able to fight it, that was it. And then entering into another terrible relationship that was doomed to failure shortly after that, after a promotion back in 2010, it just got steadily worse, and I eventually got to the point where something had to be done. And I did. I managed to stand back with the help of my family and, met another lovely lady that I'm also now married to. But I have had relapses, as to say, a major one 3 years ago, despite the fact that I've been married for over 5 years, which put me back in hospital, etc. And it was really the journey back from there that led me towards Smart Recovery and the fantastic support services that we have in the Brighton and Hove area, who looked at me and said, well, you're the sort of person with an analytical, scientific type mind. Why not try Smart? We're looking as an organisation then, or us, the service provider in the Brighton and Hove area for people who are interested in this. So I did. I immediately found an affinity with it. Decided to train as a Smart facilitator, did so, and then started, that journey with them. But there have been some lapses, since then. The last one being heavily over, probably November through to January of last year and into this year, which brought me back again into the Smart program. Now with a new service provider in Brighton and Hove, but now thoroughly immersed in the whole Smart, recovery program again, and this time hopefully forever, and this time not walking away from it again, which was a big mistake for me. So that's history. So.
No, that's great, Clive. So just for my benefit, I don't know if Steph knows a bit more about your background. When it was at its worst, was that basically like drinking 24/7, or was it just every day?
It was every day. It was it was an automatic reaction, and of course, after a reasonably short period of time, as we all know, the physical addiction takes over. The physical need takes over. It's waking up in the morning with the shakes and everything else, and curing it with a drink by the side of the bed.
Yeah.
It really did get to that stage, and even while in the relationship I'm in now, what it is that drove me back, I'm not really sure. Probably the bereavement process hadn't been completed. That's probably a major, if you like, contributing factor to, as a trigger. And other things, other issues, stress related to work issues. But by then I'm working for myself, running my own company, my own business. Same sort of thing, expertise, working with the European Commission, chairing various trade associations, just still a high pressure environment. And that maybe the thought in the back of the mind still was, well, remember those days when you could just numb that and try it again. But again, it went too far. I have an addictive personality. I should know one is never going to be enough. So that's the lesson I learned, and so hopefully this time around it will be very different.
So this last time, you mentioned a number of times getting sober. You ended up in hospital. So your drinking patterns were quite on the physical addiction side for how many years?
Well, let's say a number of years. I mean, I suppose if you lumped it all together, you would say that it was over years, but it very much came in waves. Mm-hmm. And there would be times when I would step back and I would become effectively a moderate drinker and probably make that big mistake of thinking I can do the controlled drinking thing, it's fine. Mm-hmm. When I now look back, and now I've got the rational mind, even those periods when I was saying to myself, well, I'm controlled drinking, I was probably drinking most days. Mm-hmm. And on some occasions I was drinking far too much and using excuses to do so. And then the move from that into even heavier drinking is a very simple one. Any form of trigger, any form of excuse that the mind gives you to do it, it can happen. And I think that's the way my cycle has gone. The only way I've learned now that to stop that cycle is to give up drinking completely, total abstinence. There is no such thing as controlled drinking for somebody who suffers serious addictive behaviour. That is the lesson that I've learned now, which is completely different from where I have been before. And I think that was the problem with, best part of now 2 years ago when I stopped facilitating smart meetings, because I thought, well, that's it. I was going back to controlled drinking, and I felt I was managing it, and I may have been. But of course, what you don't do then is manage the fact that you have a strong addictive personality. And it only takes that one thing, perhaps, or a combination of things to push you back over that edge very quickly. So the only way to do it is to do the hard work and say never again. That's the position I'm in now.
So that's quite a recent thing for you then, Clive, I'm guessing, the actual to be done with it for good.
Absolutely.
So
yes,
that's interesting. So before we get on to all of the great smart stuff, what was my question I was going to say? So you were actually doing the smart program, and you still thought at one point or another you could possibly moderate.
Yes, I did. Yes, I mean I have seen examples where it is possible. I mean I would never say totally, categorically that it is not possible for somebody with an addictive personality not to be able to control drinking. I think it is incredibly rare for that to actually happen. And I occasionally use the word to myself of delusional. And it's too dangerous. I'm trained in risk management, and then really on a risk factor basis, it's far too high. It's not worth taking that risk in doing it. My mistake was to think that it was possible, that I was over it, everything's good, it's happy, the business is going well, I'm still the main man here, things are going well, and I can just continue like this. But it doesn't take much for those physical life conditions to change then the mental state somewhat, which can drive you back to where you were very, very quickly. And I think that continuing to drink in any shape or form is going to be counterproductive, because at the end of the day, you're maintaining a very high risk level. By stopping completely, you can reduce that, because then your challenge, if you like, is not to take that first drink, not to have more drinks than you are already having. I think one far easier to do than the other.
Yeah,
that's the way I look at it.
So just a very quick one, Steph, just while we're on this point. That's great. It's really interesting. So, sorry if this is a little bit personal, but I always ask this question. Do you class yourself as an alcoholic? Do you have a label for yourself? Were you just a bad habit? Was it, just years of drinking just built up? How do you kind of view it? What's happened?
I do not consider or like the word alcoholic. I look at the word alcoholic and the way it's been applied to people, and I view that as an illness, and an often one that's it's kind of on the borders of physical illness. You are an alcoholic. You are a particular type of person, and usually the stigma, if you like, or the vision, the impression of somebody who is labelled as alcoholic is that person on the street corner that can't control themselves, sitting there in wet pants and whatever, when actually that's not the case. Those people like me who use the label I prefer is somebody who suffers from an addictive behaviour, can be anybody. And, you find that facilitating smart meetings and being involved with people who do suffer from addictive behaviour, they come from all walks of life. Most of these people you can meet, you wouldn't know that they have this problem, this particular trait. Some you might, others you won't. So I think alcoholic has become a very dangerous and misused view of the world. And I personally don't like it, because it tends to me to sound as though something that you cannot control. You are completely addicted. You are an alcoholic. Therefore, you must do these things. Well, what I've learned is you can use your brain. You've chosen to do something. And if you've chosen to do something, you can choose not to do it. Yeah. And that really is a lot of the basis of, obviously, cognitive-based therapies, is that you do have a choice. And, you've made a choice. You made a choice to keep on drinking. You knew what it was doing to you. You were being irrational. But you decided to ignore that and you carried on. The reason you carried on, well, there's the psychological issue. That probably is because you do have an addictive behaviour. And overcoming that is not easy. But I do not then put that in the same camp as being an alcoholic, whatever that is. I mean, I'm not really sure what an alcoholic is, what a drug addict actually is. What I see are people who suffer from addictive behaviour, and it's that needs to be controlled.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. You mentioned control, and what I wanted to ask before was when you were talking about the in the later years of your drinking, the one of your relapses, thinking that you could control. I don't know if you found this to be true, but I did for myself. In the later stages of my drinking addiction, my physical tolerance to alcohol was so incredibly high that I think there was sort of this newfound ability to control how much I drank, because it just took such a large amount of alcohol to cause me to be drunk and exhibit those behaviors that I had in years previous, where I would end up making a fool of myself at a party or whatever. And in the later stages of my drinking, because I had such a high tolerance, I really could drink quite a lot and control it, so to speak. Did you find that to be the case for yourself?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. But I think that, that there's a popular misconception. And again, we can quickly come back to the word alcoholic. When a normal, inverted commas, person hears the word alcoholic, they immediately start thinking of a drunk person, somebody who is displaying exactly what you've just said, the falling over, the slurred speech, etc. That's not actually true. And I think what you're saying actually highlights that fact. No, most of the time you're drinking to feel normal and to behave normal and to look normal. And for all intensive purposes, you are. Because that becomes your normal state. Your body has adjusted to that level. It's falling below that level, of course, when you show the immediate symptoms of shakes, incoherence, lack of clarity, etc., which can be worse than showing the symptoms of drinking too much. In fact, you could less functional through not drinking and cutting down, or not drinking at all when you're in that state, than you can from drinking too much. But yes, you find a balance, but that balance is always rising. And it's important to know that to maintain that normal state, you have to drink more and more and more each day. Eventually, you do what I do. You fall, or your body falls off the cliff. Although it's your body that says, drink some more so we can stay normal, guys, and behave normal and just function. Eventually, the body says no. And it reaches a physical limit, because we're just organic material at the end of the day. The liver is likely to give up. The cognitive functions start to give up because your brain now can't cope. The alcohol beats the body. So normality just disappears totally. Now you cannot function at all in any shape. And that's pretty much the point I got to. Although it was linked to other things, in a way, a little aside, in a way it potentially saved my life getting to that point, because whilst I was taken into hospital with what was a collapse through alcohol misuse, what actually was found that I suffered extremely low blood pressure, and I also had blood clots on my lungs, which I probably wouldn't have been diagnosed if I hadn't been taken into the hospital, and could have caused me serious illness, if not heart attack and death. So I don't know that, but it's possible. So in a way, I smile at that situation and think, well, there was some providence in there somewhere. But if I'd have continued doing what I was doing, then it would have killed me anyway. So my liver would have done.
I don't know. For myself, I really feel like I was what they would consider to be a high functioning alcoholic, and that is just that my personal situation. I'm married. My husband does well. Like I didn't have to work. My lifestyle was such that I was able to function, taking care of the kids, doing all the things I needed to do every day, and drink an extremely high amount of alcohol without anyone questioning it. My husband, that's a whole other story, the enabling and whatnot, but he's a drinker too. I could drink a large amount of alcohol without anyone even questioning it. So it got so much worse than it maybe would have under different circumstances. And I think for myself, it would have been a physical, I think it was going to kill me, but I think it would have been something like a cancer or cirrhosis would have got me before I would have given up to,
It would, but you still got to consider. I mean, during those times when you're in that form of balance, if you like, where you're drinking to balance to remain normal, is all of the other things that you then sweep under the carpet, because so many of these values that we'll probably talk about go out the window, and one of those values is your honesty. You lose it. The things that you have to stop people a lot of the time, or discourage people giving the horror stories, because it's about moving forward. But when you look back at those things, the things you did, going out at 8 o'clock in the morning to the local petrol station with a plastic bottle of, because you're going to buy some alcohol, and then fill that bottle up, and then, not bring them and throw the bottle away. The dishonesty and all of the things that you have to go through just to function, and they get worse. And they get worse, and you start lying to your loved ones and to yourself, because as I say, you push it under the table, don't you? Mm-hmm. These things don't happen. All that matters is keeping that normality going, being able to function. How will you get there? But of course, in reality, what you're doing is not then functioning normally, because you've changed the way you live. Normal people do not go to petrol stations at 8:30 in the morning to buy vodka. And giving some stupid excuse to someone about why you're drinking it, which they're not interested in anyway, so they know why you're doing it. And that's not a normal thing to do. You may think that you're feeling normal, but you're not behaving normally, even though you think you are.
No, a lot of people have talked about the going to different liquor stores each week so that you don't run into the same shop person, and all of those behaviors that are really not normal. You weave them into the fabric of your weekly activities as if it's normal, but you know exactly what you're doing, going across town to a different shop to buy your booze. So that take us back then to this last time you hit what you felt like was your final bottom, and it was Smart Recovery again. Talk about that.
It was indeed. I mean, I'll tell you what actually happened. I spent best part of 3 weeks in hospital there. I can't remember the first few days of it. I was totally out of it. But thankfully, I recovered from that. I got tremendous. I detoxed in hospital, which is tremendous. Having detoxed myself at home, that is not to be recommended. Doing it in hospital made life somewhat easier. But I came out of there, and I got a severe talking to from my current wife, and quite rightly. You have to take responsibility for yourself, etc. And I think the words that were actually used was get help or get out. Mm-hmm. That's quite sobering in itself. The next day I looked up the numbers, and I went back, and I found and started using again the fantastic support services of Brighton and Hove. Mm-hmm. I am, in a way, very lucky to live where I do. Mm-hmm. The services here are outstanding. Everything can be improved, and I'm hopefully helping them and working, with service users to make it even better. But it is outstanding. Mm-hmm. And it came out very quickly, of course, in initial interviews there, when being assessed and as to what help they give you, that I was a trained SMART facilitator. And as it was, SMART meetings were at the time being taken by a member of staff, which is not, I think, an ideal situation. They should be peer-led, in my view. So instantly, of course, it was, it helped you last time, how about now? Mm-hmm. And here I am. So, what are we, 4 months down the line now, facilitating 2 meetings a week now, mm-hmm. And also helping out, being the recorder, the minute taker, and everything else for, the service user group, with pavilions who are, that service provider in the Brighton and Hove area.
So it was Smart Recovery was recommended to you by hospital staff, or by when you were in hospital?
No, originally it was the episode 3 years ago where I actually physically ended up in a major position in hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Then the service provider, it was a different service provider, and they said it's since changed. It was CRI in those days, were the first ones to point me in the direction.
Okay.
Their interview process really sort of established a kind of, what type of person are you? Some people are very spiritual and whatever. I've always lived my life in a very sort of, especially my work life, in a very technical environment.
Mm-hmm.
Automated human identification of all good things, fingerprints, forensic science, that sort of area. So immediately cognitive-based type therapies come to mind,
mm-hmm.
because it's very likely that I would fit better with them, or have more affinity with such a program. And as it turned out, that's absolutely correct. It fits me very well. I do like the scientific, the theoretical,
mm-hmm.
that interests me greatly. So yeah, it's a kind of the hand fitted the glove really very much.
Can I just jump in there quickly, Clive? So did you? I must admit, the smart recovery is completely new to me. I was kind of only aware of the way myself and Steph got sober, and also AA. I kind of know there is other things out there, but I don't know anything about them. So just before you get into what the smart recovery is, did you try any other methods? I know you say it came in waves and stuff, but did you try anything else yourself first? Or?
Yeah, I did. I did. I nearly said I did the obvious, but in a way that's true. The obvious is immediately you think AA.
Right.
I did, and now again, one of the wonderful things of living in the Brighton area is it's almost 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There is an AA meeting or an NA meeting somewhere going on in Brighton that you can go to, even if it's just a place to be with other people.
Mm-hmm.
That is true, and it's a tremendous comfort from that aspect. But I did find that I had, some issues. I did find it very difficult to be in that environment and handle the way the spiritual side of it really was the key. Because it's, I wouldn't say I'm not a spiritual person. That's not true, because I feel I am. But with me, I think when it came to recovery, I'm a project manager, I'm a trained Prince 2 practitioner. At the end of the day, how do I proceed from this beginning to the end of a project?
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to view things very much in a project-based way.
Yeah.
That's the way my mind works. And I know there are 12 steps and 12 steps to follow, and that you could argue is the same thing. But I like to get a bit deeper into the science behind things and understand that. And I got immediately interested in positive psychology and started reading around it, not necessarily about addictive behaviour, but positive psychology in general. And yes, it fitted me extremely well, and I decided, well, this is the place where I need to be, really.
I agree with you completely on that. I myself have a background in psychology. My bachelor's degree is in psychology, and I have been in AA. I spent 3 years there in my 20s, but I had the same resistance to it. And also, as you said, I consider myself to be a spiritual person, but in getting sober, I didn't feel like I needed to access my spiritual side or any of that in order to get sober. And I also had a resistance to the idea of powerlessness. So that was one of my issues with it. But just back to the services that are sort of available for someone in our situation, I was always under the impression, and probably the reason I resisted trying to get sober for so long, was that AA was all there was. It is kind of a mainstream. It's what most people assume, and I think there's some truth to that. If you go in to see your GP or in a hospital setting, they're going to send you to whether it's a detox center treatment or a 12-step program. That's kind of it's the protocol that's used in almost any clinical setting. Is that right?
No, you're absolutely true. And I would say that in probably a lot of areas of the UK, that is still the situation in lots of ways. If somebody does end up in a hospital somewhere in the UK, it's very likely that on discharge or whatever, or during their stay in hospital or their relationship with that hospital, they will be pointed directly at AA and probably very little else.
Mm-hmm.
that situation is, I think, changing.
Mm-hmm.
And now, if I take the support services that are available here as a model, and I think they are a model, that we very much now have, you know, from Monday to Friday, from 9 o'clock in the morning through to sort of 5 o'clock in the night, there are meetings going on of various forms, you know, within Brighton, all under the banner of pavilions alone as a support service. And they include, you know, cognitive-based therapies, ACT, SMART. There are AA meetings that take place on the premises. They are a great signpost to other external means of support and recovery, such as mindfulness classes, acupuncture. Now, some of those are done in-house. Others are, as I say, signposted. You know, of course, you can do this. There are Buddhist meditation centers. There are this. There are all of these things then that become this nice whole of recovery. And it's often like that. I mean, I don't want to make it sound so in my life SMART is the only thing in my recovery. It's not. It really isn't. I mean, I do the mindfulness thing. I'm very interested in that, and I do find that helpful. My personal thing is they tend to be short term, but it does give the mind time to stop, to slow down, and, you know, relax. My mind's quite an active thing. I know that. And my job is to learn to use an active mind. So the mindfulness comes as a bit of a shock. But you want me to actually sort of switch off and live in the now? Oh dear, that's difficult. But actually, the reality is, yeah, this stuff actually does work. It's very complementary to the cognitive-based therapists. And certainly I would still go to AA meetings if I was feeling that way, that I wanted to be with people and whatever. I would certainly be able to go on my smartphone in Brighton and probably walk straight into one, and have done, and found that very, very comforting and very useful. But I think as my journey to recovery, I can't use that as my major, if you like. Other people can, quite rightly, and maybe CBT is their secondary. Fine. That's absolutely tremendous. And I think part of the whole thing about recovery services is matching the person to what's around, or helping the person match it themselves, should I say, which is far more important. If you look like it's a bit of a buffet out there, go and taste everything on the buffet, and what works for you, use them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think there are probably as many different ways to get sober as there are, you know, varieties of wine grapes, so to speak. You know, but that is the thing is this time for me getting sober, I was willing to listen to other people, what they found worked for them. I was willing to put as much into this as I could find. I was listening to podcasts and reading recovery self-help books, and I was on a Facebook recovery group, and just really was willing to listen to anything. And I even went to a few AA meetings. I didn't want that to be my path. But as you said, it works for some people, works for a lot of people. But I am really interested in learning more about smart recovery. So tell us a bit about the smart recovery tools and what works for you.
Absolutely. I mean, first let me put some history to it, if you like. Is that, you know, the principles around, you know, smart recovery, or those that it's adopt, really go back to the 1950s. You know, when you, having studied psychology, understand that, you know, if you look at psychology sort of pre-1950s, it tended to be, anything psychology tended to be the loony bin. Positive psychology was the thing that bred all this, and my great hero now, Arthur Ellis, you know, even back in the 1950s, was working very much with, you know, the cognitive-based approaches, positive psychology, how to use psychology in a way that actually helps people rather than just classifies them, and usually classifies them negatively. If you had a psychological problem, immediately it was negative. I won't come back to the use of the word alcoholic again then, because I think that is immediately a negative word, whereas addictive behaviour is not necessarily as negative. But really, the whole SMART program really it sits on the back of again, an Arthur Ellis thing, which is REBT. It's this rational emotive behavioural therapy. It's that first word is the one that in me, rationality. It's about looking at the world in a rational way and looking at the irrational parts of it, challenging it. But the Smart Recovery Program is based on 4 major planks, and these are reminded to people on the opening statement at every meeting, which are building and maintaining motivation, coping with urges, managing thoughts, feelings and behaviours, and living a balanced life. So really everything that happens in that SMART program, although works across those 4 major planks of the whole thing. It's not that necessarily today we're going to work on number 1. We're going to do a thing about building, maintaining motivation, because what you'll tend to find is the tools that are used will go across all 4 of them, or 1 or 2 of them. They may only go to 1, and it's very dependent during the meeting. It's not that there is a set agenda to a SMART meeting. You read the opening statement. You do a check-in, so everybody gets 2 or 3 minutes, perhaps say any challenges they might be facing now, any successes they've had, what's particularly worrying them, the anxieties they might be having. And once that's occurred, you'll find that themes emerge. They emerge very quickly. Yesterday, immediately after I think 4 people had checked in, what I tend to do, I sit there, I've got a little pad by the side of me, and I just write up some phrases and things that come out of it. And from that, you very quickly see that the theme is emerging. So there may be 1 topic, 2 topics, which you then take into the bulk of the meeting, the discussion stage, which is most of it. And it's during that stage that you might introduce 1 or maybe 2 or maybe none of the SMART tools. Usually you will introduce at least 1 or use 1. It might be that you'll have a particular individual with a particular problem where a SMART tool would be very useful to help that person. So you might just do that. And then the meeting will close with a checkout, which is a chance for people to say how they're feeling now and any challenges they're likely to face, etc., as they go away. And hopefully them going away saying that they've enjoyed it and are feeling better. I always add one thing to the opening statement that isn't in the official opening statement, is that the humour is allowed in this meeting, if not positively encouraged. Because I do find that it is a major part. If you can have a sense of humour and people can smile during meetings and laugh and joke with each other, everybody feels better. It works. Mm-hmm. And that is something that is missing from a lot of other meetings, I think, sometimes, the lightheartedness of it. But it does follow a structure. But how it goes for that hour and a half, you never really know.
That was just my quick question, Clive. I was just going to jump in there. So, what if I was wanting to take up the Smart Recovery path? Is it how many meetings do you do, or is it up to me per week what I do? What's the
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, at the moment, as I say, Brighton and Hove area, there are 2 meetings on a Wednesday, one on a Wednesday, one on a Friday. Some people come to all of them. Some people will go to one of them. What we have, and one of the beauties of it, is you've got a cross-section there of people in all stages of recovery. I believe at yesterday's meeting, one of the attendees there had been sober for 8 years. But I've also had at the same meeting people are still using. Because one thing, and it's worth saying, that although some SMART meetings can be advertised as completely abstinent, a completely open meeting, and certainly those in Brighton and Hove are not. If you are using, either alcohol or drugs, you are still encouraged to come to the meetings. Obviously, disruption is handled. If that happens, then you may be removed from the meeting. But that happens very rarely, and we do get people turning up on a regular. Quite often people are waiting to go into, detox recovery programs, etc. And it would be callous in a way to say you cannot come now to meetings in that 3 or 4 weeks that you're waiting for these things to happen, because you don't know what then's going to happen for people. Mm-hmm. So that would be wrong. So as long as, and you will find that most people using are actively taking part in the meeting and contribute a lot to it. Mm-hmm. So there's a very cross-section of experience, which is beautiful, because, people who have, if you're going around that cycle of change thing, who may even be in maintenance now, or have just been through a relapse and going back through the appearance is very valuable to people. So discouraging people who have, are still using is wrong as far as I'm concerned. But there we are.
So, Clive, can I just jump in again? What is the maintenance part? What is that? I've not really heard that word before.
Yeah, well, it's really, the cycle of change, really runs through. The cycle of change, is referenced in SMART. It's not necessarily part of the SMART program as such, but it starts with pre-contemplation, which is somebody who may be being told, for instance, that you're probably drinking too much, but, well, that's fine, but I'm probably not going to do anything about it, not now anyway. To contemplation, which might be, well, I probably am, and I might plan to do it. It's a bit too difficult to do it now. Then to actual sort of planning and action. So where you actually say, yes, I have. When you face this, well, I'm going to do something about this now. And you actually plan the steps that you're going to do it and then take action to do it. Now, the action stage is really that stage where you're going through, well, I know I've got a problem. I'm now seeking help actively. I'm doing something about it. I'm building those tools. I'm finding those tools, etc. And then you may well hopefully get through the action stage. So what is maintenance? You've moved on. You've got to the point where the addiction from a physical and mental point of view is not the one thing that you're thinking of every part of the day. But you still need to maintain the motivation. You still have to cope with urges. You still have to build and live a balanced life, and you still have to manage thoughts, emotions, and behaviours. But you're doing it in a, if you like, a lesser, not a lesser sense, but it's not your prime thing during the day. So that maintenance stage is in a way a dangerous stage, because that's the point where I got to. This is personal experience again. Well, in that case, I don't need these meetings anymore. I don't need this environment, being around all of these people, which actually could be counterproductive, because they're just reminding me of all of what I was. But then, of course, walking away, and then and the whole thing going out of the mind, which is not good, and because I think that once you have an addictive behaviour, then you will always have an addictive behaviour, and you've still got to realise that, and it's still got to be there and maintained in some way, or your reaction to it, your antidote to it still has to be maintained. Yeah. And I think that can be the hard part of it in lots of ways.
So the whole smart system, sorry Steph, I keep jumping in, the whole smart system then, it's for the whole package, as it were. It's not just designed to get somebody clean. Yeah, it's from start to finish, yeah.
Absolutely so. And unlike some, there is not, right, this is day one of the program. So please wait for day one of the program to come around again and then start. It doesn't work like that at all. No meeting, you never really know what's going to come up. You might find that you have, if you have a lot of new people, first smart meetings, people who may be just new to the recovery service, who may still be using, or have decided that their problem is becoming a problem again. In other words, they might be in a maintenance stage, but they are getting now uncontrollable urges that are almost uncontrollable, and they want to come back into an environment. Then you might find that you'll start doing things like picking up one of the tools, for instance, which is like cost-benefit analysis, which is one of the smart tools, which basically just says, right, let's have a look.
Pros and cons.
In a business, let's look at the benefits of using and the disbenefits of doing it, and let's look at the benefits and disbenefits of using or not using, and just putting it in 4 boxes and just look at it. So it's a great way of building some motivation and leading towards people examining their core values. And then maybe going on to use another one of the tools, the hierarchy of values, which really sits at the top. Put down on a piece of paper, just off the top of your head, what is the important things in your life? What are your values? And then put them in some kind of hierarchy, the things that really matter to you. And then working on from that, you go to the discussions into goal setting, planning. What is a goal? How do you define a goal? Do you put it into the other SMART way of looking at things? Is it specific? Is it measurable? Is it achievable? Is it realistic? And is it time bound? Things like that. So there are two SMARTs going on in a way, but so one thing can lead into another, from one tool to another, and they cross over beautifully, and they all fit together into this wonderful matrix. But what I would say to people who come along to SMART meetings is, if you go to one and you go, oh, okay, that was, maybe it was a little bit technical or a little bit complex. Hopefully it never is. Hopefully it's layman terms. But don't just stop there, because it's not really until you picked up, and I'll explain what I mean by the toolkit in a minute, enough to put into your toolkit, which you can start to mesh together, that you build an arsenal. And I mean, just let me quickly explain what I mean by the toolkit, because to me it's very powerful, because this is about the mind. It's about pushing the pause button and going, hang on, I've got an urge, I've got a situation, I'm finding I'm in an anxiety area here, I'm feeling bad about something, I'm having a thought about something, what should I do? Stop. And what I like to think about is an invisible bum bag, which just fits around my waist. And in there I've got these things that I know and have used before, the ones that work for me, and I can put my hand in there and go, right, hang on, should I? Yes. But this might be a time when I can dispute an irrational thought, which is my favourite tool from SMART, and go, sit down a minute, imagine yourself in the uncomfortable, irrational chair, work through and go, right, okay, this is the thought I have. Now move to the comfy Chesterfield. Sit down, relax, and rationalise the thought, and come away. Disarm the hurtful thoughts, downgrade them, do whatever you need to do. Learn those, use those tools that you're learning about in the SMART recovery program. And I think that's its beauty. It's that way that the tools hang together so perfectly. And it's necessarily one for one situation. It could be, a number of tools for a situation, or all of them, or just one. As I say, I like that. I like that works very much for my way of thinking.
So it's not a rigid system, is it? You develop it around what you need, and it sounds good.
The tools sound similar to that of cognitive behavioral therapy, in that it's the client or the patient, however you want to say it, is expected to be proactive in their recovery and learn these tools and use these tools in their day-to-day life, which, I mean, for some people might be challenging. I mean, I'm sure it's challenging for everyone, but talk about that a bit, just the day-to-day use of these tools, because I'm thinking that these can be used for anyone, not even those with addictive behaviors, but just these could be great tools in dealing with any situations in your life, being oversensitive to how people react to you, or anything.
I mean, the example I like to use, particularly for people who are new into SMART recovery, new to meetings, is say, well, just look at a situation that probably most of us have been in. Whether you suffer from addictive behaviour or not, and it actually happened to me. This is what made me think about it. Is I'm travelling on public transport. In this case, it's the bus. I'm actually on the way to a SMART meeting, and there is a chap on his smartphone, and he's screaming down the smartphone, talking to a guy called John about where this guy John is, very, very loudly. You could hear him on the whole bus. You could feel the tension in the air. And I found myself feeling quite, starting to get angry, starting to get a bit anxious about this guy, because I thought he was a bit threatening, and all of these thoughts. And then he got off the bus, and then everybody started talking to each other. Two people actually said, "Don't I know you?" "Yes, you do. You're my neighbour of 3 doors." And they ended up arranging to meet, and because they both discovered they had mutual interest from this one incident of this man shouting down the phone. But the point of that is, and how this fits with the CBT, REBT, cognitive-based thing, is really what's happening to you is you're having some irrationality going on. Your irrationality is that I must be annoyed by this person. This person must not be doing this. There must be a better way. The driver must do something. The world shouldn't allow people like this. It's what in SMART is called masturbation, which is quite a humorous term. But if you then just sit down and do what I do and say, well, instead of thinking very technical about, disputing irrational beliefs, try and put it into some sort of situation. What I do is say, well, I just think of two chairs. This is what I actually do with two chairs. One of them is one of those very small uncomfortable school chairs designed for 5-year-olds. But imagine yourself as an adult sitting in it. It's not comfortable. It's not comfortable because that represents the irrational thought. That is my anxiety with this guy screaming down his phone, my anger at him, and my masturbation, my belief that he must not do these things, or whatever. But when I move to the comfy chair, how can I dispute what I've just gone through? Well, I can. He was screaming down the phone. Maybe he's deaf. Maybe he's hard of hearing. Maybe the guy he's talking to is hard of hearing. He was talking about locations for this guy. Maybe this guy has threatened suicide, and he's trying to desperately find him. And at the end of the day, why shouldn't he shout down his phone? Really, there's nothing written anywhere that says he must be this wonderful, nice person and great to everybody and do charitable events, but he doesn't have to. It's not written anywhere. So by the time you've thought of that, you've disarmed it, and you can start changing the way you think. So instead of saying, that guy, they totally beep, and I really hate him, you could say, it's a bit annoying, isn't it? But never mind, I'm getting off the bus soon.
Mm-hmm. So you're disarming the thought.
That's relevant in terms of the recovery, bringing it round. But why that's relevant to recovery is what has potentially been a trigger to you getting off the bus and going into the pub and having a drink might now be, well, I'll just continue and go on to my meeting or do what I was doing, because your trigger might be the anxiety or the anger. And if you can disarm that, fantastic. And that's really the way the tools are used. So, it's not a question of them being highly technical and have to read a book and go, what was it I learned? Mm-hmm. That's simple techniques that you can learn and just put away somewhere and just pull back almost randomly to your head.
Right. I mean, that's the sort of thing, like you say, anyone could use this to combat just anxiety or if you're reacting constantly on emotions without ever stopping to think about why you're having a thought, or feeling, you can deal with any number of issues in day-to-day life.
Well, true. And I think, I should have said it earlier, but, one thing to remember is that, and you will know, Steph, having studied psychology, that there's this little triangle that happens between thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Mm-hmm. Now, in the SMART world, the REBT world, the concentration is very much on the thought.
Right.
Because that thought, we think in words. Now, it might be that if I start thinking, I really hate this, I cannot cope with this, this is too much for me to bear, I am always so useless to everything, then immediately the emotion that goes with that drives a behavior. Mm-hmm. Now, that behavior could easily be to use.
Right.
I know that, I can just dumb it down then, bugger it. I'm going to go to the pub and dumb the whole thing down. But if that original thought can be changed from the uses, I've made a right mess of this too. Now, look, hang on. There's some things I'm really good at, some things I'm not. I'm human. Hell, I can make mistakes. Everybody does. Now, it might not be perfect, but it's better than I'm a total disaster and useless and shouldn't be in this world. Mm-hmm. And therefore, your trigger can also be taken away, can be disarmed. Mm-hmm. And that is actually a SMART tool, disarm. It's disruptive imagery and self-talk awareness and more refusal method, where basically you can name, you can dispute it using just dispute the words you're using, change them, downgrade them, disarm them. Simple as that. And very simple techniques to, well, they're not actually. They're simple techniques to learn, but they need practice. And I stressed this and stressed it actually a lot yesterday's meeting, when somebody said, I'm really using these tools now, but I have to keep at it. I have to keep practicing. Right. And it's absolutely true. It's not, a magic, here's a get out of jail free card. You have to work at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So these really are relapse prevention techniques.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It's at the end of the day, the more you do these things and the more you realise that you're getting benefit from them, the more you'll want to know about them, the more you'll want to use them. That's exactly the cycle I'm through. I do have that sort of inquiring, scientific type mind. So yes, wow, yeah, I see how that works. How does that work? Why does that work? What else can I do? Not everybody's like that. Of course they're not. It's not normal in a way for people to naturally be like that. And particularly when you're in the early stages of recovery, when the mind's not in total clarity yet.
Right.
You've got to use tools in a way that people will understand and will be willing to use. But having other people in the meeting in various stages who've been through that process and say, look, guys, this does work, keep at it, is key, and empowering, very empowering to have that sort of voice in meeting.
So for someone like myself or Glenn, we're a little over 6 months sober, and if we were to want to start using some of these tools at this point for, just relapse prevention, as well as just changing our thought processes to start to build a happier, better life, what would you recommend? I mean, would we need to go to meetings, or is there, enough literature out there we could find a good book, or are there other sort of videos on YouTube, or, I'm sure there are resources out there for people who just want to start to incorporate some of these tools and techniques?
Yeah, sorry, I'm turning away from the camera for a second, so I'm just going to grab a book. I'll quote it in a second. But yes, I would say that the first place to go, depending on where you, not depending on where you are, it doesn't really matter. There are two major sites, if you like. It's www.smartrecovery.org is the site. That is the American hosted site, but lots of resources already on there. You can register on that site to join in chat rooms. There are online meetings which are run in exactly the same way as a physical face-to-face meeting in terms of the structure of the meeting. All you need to join into those, well, you don't even need it, but if you have a microphone, that's tremendous. You do what we're doing now, just talk online, or you can type, or you can just sit and watch and listen. The benefit of that is you've got people from all over the world, which is tremendous,
right,
and quite fascinating in itself. But there are a lot of tools, etc., on that site. Now, in the UK, just add UK at the end of it, so it's .org.uk. So Smart Recovery. So smartrecovery.org.uk. Again, it's a different site, but of course it's allied with the parent site. Again, resources there that you can sign up to. You'll find lists of meetings, physical meetings that are going on, whether they're open or closed meetings, etc., in your location. If there are any, hopefully there are. And there are obviously resources, pointers on the site to literature, etc., to books you could read. And one I would definitely recommend is Albert Ellis's book itself, which is called Feeling Better, Getting Better, Staying Better. It's an absolutely wonderful read, written in pretty much layman's terms. And he doesn't even hold back on the bad language. I just love him as a person. I wish I met him.
My kind of book. That's great.
Profound self-help therapy for your emotions is the subtitle of the book, but I would highly recommend anybody to read that book. I'm not a great fan of self-help books, and I'm not really quite sure it fits that category, but it's one that I just couldn't put this down because it put the whole SMART program into context. And I could understand what the roots of the SMART program were from the work that Arthur Ellis had done, Maslin and all of these great people too. But yes, the first point of call is definitely the online presence. Go to the Smart Recovery websites, have a look. You can register then on the site to say to involved in the chat rooms, but you can also go through a little self-teaching exercise or program that they put called Getting Smart, which really just takes the basics of CBT and the SMART program, pretty much as we've talked to today. It's a 4-point program. These are the areas that it covers. And that in itself is extremely useful, even if you do that before you go to a meeting. It might be the thing that you decide, well, actually, that sounds really good. I've done that bit of it, now I'll go to a meeting. You wouldn't walk in then totally cold to it, the whole thing.
Right.
Not that should be a real problem, but you would go in with knowledge of the program.
Some of the terminology and...
Yes, yeah, exactly. And if you want to then go on to do the smart facilitator training, please, the more of us, the better.
Mm-hmm.
You need to run that first anyway. You cannot do the smart facilitator training until you've done getting smart. And really, you know, if you're bruised, you can take your time overdoing it. It can take you a day. It might take you a couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
The smart facilitator training, mainly online, but with, you know, it's all online. You're probably looking at a week, 10 days of not putting in more than a couple of hours a day or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's a very enjoyable program to actually learn too. So, and you're helping yourself at the same.
Well, I'm just fascinated by this. I do think that when people watch this video, they're gonna also, you know, find that they could get a lot out of this. I'm actually going to look into this for myself. I find it very interesting. So what's sort of one final thoughts, maybe the best advice you've been given in your recovery, or something that you can leave our viewers with?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's very simple. Is the one thing that you need to learn is to push the pause button.
Right.
Because that pause button, we go through our lives mainly on autopilot a lot of the time. When you're in an addictive state, when you're in recovery or you're using, you're almost totally on autopilot. There is only one thing.
And we're so impulsive.
Your core value is, bosh, it is my use. The pause button gives you the time to stop, think about it, rationalize what's going on, look at the world in a different way, but use your mind to do it. And remember that it's about choices that you have made, are about to make, you know, and will make in the future. If you can inform those choices and understand the choices you have made and put them into context, then you're halfway there. That's mine.
Excellent.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Clive. I feel like we've just touched the tip of the iceberg here. We could go on, and hopefully you'd be willing to join us again, and we can kind of pick apart some other parts of the SMART program and talk about them. I think that would be really great.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Big thank you for me as well, Clive. I've learned a lot there because I knew nothing about the Smart Recovery Program at all. So, excellent. Thank you very much for your time.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me there.
Great. Thank you.